It's really one of the first times that we've come across the word worship, if I remember correctly, and it's a very difficult word to contend with too. You know, because if you're like me, or if you're like me when I was a kid, because I haven't thought about this for a long time, it was never really obvious to me why God would want to be worshipped. You know, if you go to church and you offer up your praise and thanks to God, and you think, well, really, does that make a lot of sense? It's like, why in the world is that what he wants? It's almost like you're kneeling down in front of an ancient Middle Eastern, you know, tyrannical emperor and vowing your submission, and that never sat well with me, and I suppose it doesn't sit well with many people, and I think that's because it's not the proper way of conceptualizing it. Like, what happens when you see what Abraham does continually, and this seems to be implicit in the use of the word worship in this particular situation, is that, you know, as we discussed, he has an adventure in his life that comes to an end. So there's an episode in his life, it comes to an end, and then there's a period of, you might consider it, where he reconstitutes himself to some degree. And that's when he makes his sacrifices. And it seems to me that it's that reconstitution that constitutes the worship. The worship is something like, you know, this is alluding back to my original proposition that it's how you act that's the issue. And the worship is the decision to enact the good in whatever form it is that you can conceptualize it, as well as trying to continually reconceptualize the good in a manner that makes the good that you're conceptualizing even that much better, right? Because when you start aiming, the probability that you're going to be aiming in the right direction is very low. But hypothetically, as you aim and as you practice and as you learn, the target is going to shift in front of your eyes, and you're going to be able to follow it ever more clearly. And that seems to me, and especially given the context that this word is used in this particular story, is a much more appropriate interpretation of what constitutes proper worship. And I suppose it's akin to the later Christian idea that it's the imitation of Christ that's the sacred duty of every Christian and every human being, I suppose, insofar as that's an archetypal idea. And the idea is something like, well, it's the embodiment of the good that's the issue. And it's not your stated belief in the good. And, you know, when Nietzsche was criticizing Christianity, this is actually one of the things that he brought up as a major issue. He said that he believed Christianity had lost its way because it had introduced a confusion between stated belief, which is, say, your belief in the divinity of Christ, whatever it means if you state that. It isn't obvious what it means that when you state that, because it isn't obvious what it would mean that you believe it, or even what it is that you're believing in. As far as Nietzsche was concerned, in some sense, not only was that beside the point, it was dangerously beside the point, because it actually allowed the Christian believer not to adopt the moral burden that was actually appropriate to the faith, which was to, and this is, I'm using a kind of a Jungian concept here, to manifest the archetype within the confines of your own life. And that's to make the divine, that your relationship with the divine, your relationship with the transcendent and infinite, into something that's actually realizable in the context of your own life, which is to say, well, you know, you're supposed to, again, to act out the highest good of which you're capable. Now, that'll transform your life to some degree into an archetypal adventure. There's no way around that, because as you attempt to climb a higher mountain, let's say, or to aim at a higher target or something like that, then the things around you will become increasingly dramatic and of import. That happens by necessity, obviously, because if you're aiming at something difficult and profound and you're really working at it, then your life is going to become perhaps increasingly difficult and profound. But that might be okay. That might be exactly what you need as an antidote to the implicit limitations that face you as a human being. And so